and we are live with episode 40 of the Wake Up podcast. And on this episode, I have someone who is a bit different to the flavor of usual guests I have on the pod. Her name is Duriye, which is a Turkish name. Other people like to call her Doris or D. She runs a page on Facebook called Reignite Democracy Australia. She's an advocate for human rights, and she popped across my radar from a friend of mine who was like, "Hey man, check out this girl. She's switched on and she's talking the same shit as you are." And I was like, "Okay, I'll check it out." I watched a little video from the car and I was like, "Yeah, I need to get her on the pod." So, Duriye, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
For sure. We were just having a chat before we kicked this off of like, we actually grew up in a similar area in the west side of Sydney. I won't say which particular area, but it's funny how those kind of roots and the roots in those sort of areas, and also the kind of prior culture we come from. I assume you're sort of second gen Aussie, right? In that sense, like your parents would have come off the boat, yeah?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, mine too. So my background is Macedonian, so it's like we're sort of from that same sort of area. And I don't know, that sort of, are you an 80s baby or a 90s baby?
90s.
Okay, so I'm a late 80s, but I think it's sort of like our generation is sort of one that has kind of, we've got one foot in the new world, but we've still got one foot, grounded in the sort of conservative, work your fucking ass off and do something for yourself kind of world. It's it's really interesting.
Sure.
So that sort of brings me to my first question that I had here on my thing is could you talk us through maybe a little bit about how, like, your journey as you, over the last, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it's been, has sort of led you to being a more critical thinker? Because I guess we were saying this sort of offline earlier, is like we are genuinely surrounded today by people who are literally just willing to conform, willing to buy into stupid ideas like, oh, we're all in this together, or it's for everyone else's safety. Like I was at the airport the other week, and like they had this thing just running every 5 minutes. Oh, at our airport, your safety is our number one priority. I was like, fuck off. Like, my safety is my priority, not your priority. Like, your priority is to fly the fucking plane, not to worry about, my respiratory health. It's like, it just drove me absolutely mental. So talk me through what you think were some of the seeds in your life that sort of helped you think more differently, or think more adversarially, or think more critically. I'd love to know.
Well, growing up, I was always a very curious little girl, and I always used to ask questions, and I was just so intrigued by why that, why this, and I remember thinking, looking at my parents work their ass off, and because growing up where I grew up, it was different. I mean, we had to work for everything that we had, and I used to think, like, is this what life is about? Work 9 to 5 days a week, sometimes even more, and so that you can pay off your house when you're like 70, 60, ready to retire, and then that's when you can enjoy life, but you're just too withered away and exhausted and tired to really do the things that you wanted to do when you were younger. And it's just, I always used to think, like, what a depressing life. Like, is this what the creator had planned for us? And so fast forward a few more years, and we have a pandemic, and we're told to stay in our houses. We're told to cover our mouths and restrict our breathing, and we're just being totally controlled. I went on a journey where I started to, inside of me, something said, this is not right. This cannot be happening. These people cannot be telling us that we need to be kept in our houses and controlling our every move, and even to the point where what we're breathing, you know what I mean? And so I started to like dig deep and look into some research, and I came across common law. And it's so interesting because what this common law pretty much explains what has happened, the fraud that has been committed by our governments for many years, and how they've essentially, with our birth certificate, turned us into a legal fiction, and they're just exploiting us our whole lives. And we're actually entitled to a trust. And they say when you're born, depending on how many pounds you are, you have that much gold in pounds, because that is that is the land, the Commonwealth, and that is part of the trust that you're in. And so and I realized, holy crap, like we've been living a lie, and life was never meant to be like this. We were never meant to be slaving away. We had all these entitlements when we were born into the nation, you know. And ever since then, I've just been going on a rampage. And as you've seen on my page, I like to share a lot of information about our rights and about the government being a corporation. And it's just so freeing, realizing that these people that we call a government, they are meant to serve and protect us. But over the years, things have turned over, and they've used the legislation against us to exploit us, like making cars, having to register cars. You know, why do we need to do that? That's more money in their pockets. You know what I mean? And yeah, so it is my mission now to break that and to end that exploitation that's been happening for many years, and to actually give people freedom and not having to work their backsides off. And that's the thing, when we're so busy working and surviving, we don't have time to look into any of this, and they've kept us really distracted. And yeah, so here we are now.
Cool. There's a bunch of things I'm going to want to unpack there. I think there's how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
26.
26. Okay, cool. So I remember I went through a very similar phase, and I set up like private foundations and all this sort of stuff, to sort of be, to basically reclaim my sovereignty as an individual outside of the legal fictions. I did all that sort of stuff in my mid-20s. So it's funny, you're sort of going through a very similar journey that I went through almost 10 years ago now. But there's some really important nuances, because a lot of the a lot of that stuff does get muddied, because people try, like, they basically do mental gymnastics to try and prove things on both sides, like both from the government side and both from the people who are trying to supposedly expose the government. Like there's a lot of nuance which is not understood, but if you take it from a first principles standpoint, you can actually cut through a lot of the shit, a lot of the noise, and a lot of conjecture, which we'll do a little bit of today. But I guess what I'm curious on what you mentioned a little bit, like you were curious as a young person. You always like to ask questions. You watched your family work their fucking ass off. Now, I'm a big believer in hard work anyway. Like, people need to work hard. I think the root of all evil for humanity is actually the idea of entitlement. No one's entitled to fucking shit except for that which you work for. That's one of my fundamental beliefs is, like, for example, people these days, for example, we're drowning in all this talk about rights. It's like, well, one person's right is another person's responsibility, and if it's another person's responsibility, you're actually infringing on their rights. So I actually think human rights are, and this is something we'll get into a bit later in the discussion, but I actually think human rights don't exist. I think they're a fucking fiction. I actually think we only have one human right, which is the right to choose, and that is tempered through what's called the non-aggression principle, which is, so long as your choice does not infringe on another person's capacity to choose, that's your only right. Anything other than that must be earned. Whether it's food, whether it's wealth, whether it's land, whether it's, I even think, things like love, etc., need to be fucking earned, because you don't just walk around and expect everyone to love you and you can behave like a shithead. Like you actually need to perform work. and you need to add input, you need to add value into society to have anything. Like, you don't deserve shit, you need to earn shit. But anyway, coming off that tangent, prior to your little digging into this stuff over the last 6, 12, 18 months, whatever it's been since this madness has engulfed the world, what do you think was some of the earlier seeds potentially that were planted? Like, were you a bit of a reader when you were younger? Did you sort of study any particular philosophies? Was there any inspirations in your younger years? I know for me, like, people like Alan Watts were really influential, and your Tony Robbins and your Jordan Petersons and all of that. So Aristotle, etc. So I had a lot of that sort of grounding. Was there anything for you in the early days that you can sort of point to that helped?
Yeah,
give you a
well,
better...
I'd have to say I became quite spiritual in my late teens, early 20s, and I discovered a whole new realm, and I came across really interesting people. Like, have you heard of Neil Donald Walsh? Conversations with God?
Yes. Conversations with God is a fantastic book. Yes.
That is like my Bible.
Yeah.
And when I read that, my mentality and my mindset and everything just shifted, and I realized, wow, I've been living under a lot of limiting beliefs, that unfortunately have been passed from our parents and upbringing, but they don't know themselves, you know what I mean? So that's what they've been taught. So, and I just think I'm not a religious person, and I grew up in an Islamic family, and so it was quite strict, and there was quite a bit of fear around that, and I never liked that about it. And so when I discovered Neil Donald Walsh, it made me understand things from another perspective. And sometimes religion can be a bit limiting. And I don't know, I don't mean to like put down religion, but I think a lot of the fear-based aspect to it can also may possibly be a means of control. This is just my opinion. But yeah, and then I also started to follow David Icke and listen to him. And at the time, a lot of what he was saying was so like insane, but I was like, I would not be surprised if it was true. I was very open to it. Do you know what I mean? And the 9/11 was an absolute hoax, and that was really obvious. And so when COVID happened, I sort of pieced everything together with what David Icke has been saying, and just the way the world was run. And it was very easy to integrate and absorb that this is all a massive hoax or a massive exaggeration, because in my opinion, there has been an agenda for a very long time. And if you look at the Georgia Guidestones, and you look at even the signs and what they put in films and music industry, there's a lot of dark stuff going on. It's very obvious, it's in your face. Does that make sense? Like, do you know what I mean? Yeah. So it wasn't hard for me to accept that something's going on. It was pretty easy because I was very open to it and aware of already of it, of like the Illuminati and all that. So
yeah, two very interesting and very divergent influences there. Because did you ever watch Zeitgeist at any point in time by Peter Joseph?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So me and Peter Joseph had a mad fucking argument on Twitter because like he's right about so many things, but he's just fucking blind to what a functional solution might be to this. But anyway, I think Peter Joseph's work in Zeitgeist was very important, and he touched on a lot of the problems. I think I don't think he really appreciates the importance of the emergence of religious institutions. I think I think Jordan Peterson is someone who's really powerful in sort of articulating how the notions of the teachings and the ideas and the principles that have emerged out of religion over the centuries started off as guidelines, but what we do as humans fundamentally is we take guidelines and then we build them into these static walls. And Tony Robbins has a great saying, which is, the wall that protects you over time can become the wall that imprisons you. And that's what happens with institutions over time, is that they decay. And the whole point of an institution, in a free society, is that if an institution starts to not function properly, if it stops being the wall that protects you and becomes the wall that imprisons you, it needs to collapse and fall. But unfortunately, we live in a world where the institutions that originally emerged to, protect what's the most, I think, the cornerstone of all prosperity is private property. The idea, the very notion of the nation state, the very notion of government actually emerged as a mechanism to protect private property rights of individuals. It has turned into the biggest, how can I say, overlord / fucking threat to private property rights. It's become this public edifice that, now can strip you of any private property right you have, to the point where they can tell you that your body is no longer your private property, that we will mandate what the fuck you should put in it and what you should breathe and what you should, slap a face diaper on your face, which is madness. But yeah, and anyway, like it's really interesting that you touched on also Neil Donald Walsh, because like for me, he was an early inspiration. Like in my young years, that book I actually remember reading. Holy crap! I was living in Wollongong at the time, and I think I was doing door-to-door sales, and I was sort of definitely in that kind of spiritual stage. And I remember picking up that book and just finding it so powerful. In fact, you've re-inspired me. I actually want to pick that up again. I might reread it, because it's been a good, Jesus, probably 15 years since I've read that. Now I feel old. But
Yeah.
with the David Icke stuff, it's like, like you said, most people have thought he was crazy, but it's just fucking funny how so many of the things that, I mean, I don't believe in his fucking lizard people shit. And, the problem is he's got some, complete stupidities in there, but he's actually got a bunch of things that that are actually correct, as zany and as stupid as they sound. And who's the other guy that got banned? Infowars. Alex Jones.
Yes.
He's as well been railing against the machine for God knows how many years. And, half the shit that he said that people said, oh, dude, it's not fucking true, has actually turned out true. It's just hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, it's interesting, like you talk about the lizard people and that being a bit outrageous. But have you heard of Zeitgeist Sitchin?
No.
Okay, so he's like a philosopher. He wrote a book about the Anunnaki and how it's like an alien race that came to Earth to mine gold because their atmosphere was like falling apart or whatever. And then he talks about how they saw the Neanderthals here and they genetically modified, they created like a genetic mixture of their genes and the Neanderthals, which created us. And then from then we became their slaves. And these Anunnaki that Zeitgeist Sitchin talks about is they have a lizard-like appearance. So I've looked into that, and although I'm not fully convinced, there are a lot of historical sites around the world. And if you watch Ancient Aliens on Netflix, this explores more deeper into that. There's a lot of ancient sites around the world that they're completely on the other side of the world to each other, but they have the same depictions of sky people and how these people from the sky came down and just all this really interesting stuff. So in saying how outrageous some of David Icke's claims are of these lizard people, I'm still open to that, because I don't believe that we are the only creatures in this whole universe, only race or whatever you want to call it. So I would not be surprised if there is some kind of other species here that are at our level, if that makes sense.
Potentially. I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I've done my deep dives, you know, when I was younger into this stuff, and I don't know. I've come away thinking that it's a lot of I don't know. For me, I've found more first principles explanations for the stupidity going on in the world than needing sort of those kind of explanations for it. So in the absence of that, so it's like sort of an Occam's razor is that, yeah, there's a small fucking chance that that sort of stuff potentially exists. But I mean, I know people who would definitely 100% be depicted as lizard people. And I know that they started from the gutter like I did, but people now call them lizard people. Like, it's just that there's just a lot of like I fundamentally believe we're all fucking human. You know, we've all evolved, and what we do is we build institutions over time that grow and decay, and that is the natural function of all things in life. But we are at a funny stage in society because at the moment, the institution is managing to maintain itself in a position of strength because it does two primary things. It can print money and it taxes us. And in doing so, we actually feed the beast and enable it to continue doing what it does. And that is it is a perfectly functional explanation, completely devoid of needing explanation of a different set of people ruling us. It's actually fundamentally sound from a game theoretic position, which is if you're a part of an institution that exists from confiscating people's money through taxation and through devaluing people's wealth by printing money, game theoretically speaking, you want to maintain that position because you get to enrich yourself and somebody else pays the cost. Anyone would want to fucking do that. Like, you know, if you could work, if you could just be rich and not have to work, and no matter what decision you make, whether it's good or bad in life, like if you flip a coin and heads you win and tails someone else lose, man, that is the ultimate win for you. And so what that does is that's basically how governments and central banks function today, is that if you're a government, you can make whatever decision you want to make. It doesn't matter what decision you make. And if you get it right, great, you benefit. If you get it wrong, you still benefit, because all you do is you raise taxes or you print more money, which impoverishes your subjects at your best. So it's like, it's in legal terms, it's called a moral hazard. It means I can do anything that I want and you pay for my mistakes. So that doesn't require it doesn't actually require another class of people. It just means that it requires an institution that we know as a public institution that is not held liable in the same way as the constituents that fund the institution are. And that's where, you know, like I'm fundamentally against the notion of the state and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, I don't know if you've got any comment on that, but I was going to sort of take us through a slightly different direction for a moment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, see, that's where they've got us. Under common law and under the Constitution, there needs to be a jury that actually makes the decisions in the end. And so instead of like you were saying, the institution that just kind of controls everything and there's no one above them, it should have never been like that. That is fraudulent to the people. And what there really needs to be is, see, like, we think a democracy is voting. It's not. Democracy is not voting. It's not having representatives make legislation. Democracy is giving the citizens power to annul the government, and they essentially have the power to get rid of legislation that doesn't serve the people. And you do this by having a jury. And they've gotten rid of juries in their courts. They don't have that anymore. And they only have a judge which works for the system. So there's no like, do you know what I mean? There's no one that's going to stop what they want to do in the end, because they've completely gotten rid of the main controllers of this that should be in charge. You know what I mean? And
there's no accountability. There's no accountability back to the constituents that they're supposed to be representing.
Yeah, and that's what they've done over the years. They've completely gotten rid of the natural law, the common law, the power of the people, and they've set themselves up in all these positions where they can never be punished or put on trial or anything. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, wouldn't you do the same though if you were in that position?
Me, would I do the same?
Wouldn't we all? So I'm playing devil. I'm being tongue in cheek here a little bit, but if you have the opportunity to do that, where you can create
a system where you can't be held accountable.
Yeah. Like, game theoretically speaking, unless you're a person of extremely high integrity, which, as we've seen in the world, there's not too many, the chances are the system tends towards corruption, right? So if you've got a system that has the tendency towards corruption, basically the rule of thumb is it will always tend towards corruption. And that's where the problem is here, is that, so as much as one might say it's wrong and everything, they did what actually makes game theoretic sense, which is, well, I'm just going to remove this, I'm going to remove that, and over time, it wasn't like, this is why I don't think it's ever a grand plan. You know, the problem with the public system is that at each, during each period of time, when you have sort of a public representative in office, and when I say public representative, I mean like government at large, is that during that time, what they want to do is they want to look the best while they're in power, and they want to make the most of their time there. Like, that is, again, when you think about incentives, like if you look at the world through incentives, all of this stuff, all of this behavior stuff makes sense. And what you do while you're in there, you're like, well, fuck, if we could make this decision without having to be held accountable there, well, it would be just much easier for us to make the decision without having to ask someone. So let's just pass a rule and, just remove this little accountability thing here, and we can, be more efficient in how we represent the people, so that's kind of the justification that someone might have in doing so. And then they're like, yep, let's, organize this, and then they sort of pass it. And what happens is, over time, this is the slippery slope problem, is that over time, you move towards less and less controls, less and less accountabilities, not necessarily because it was a grand plan from the beginning, but because you've inched that way ever so slowly and incrementally over time, that you're already, like, if you look back towards where the first constitution was or where the first rules were, you're like, well, fuck, we've come this far already. What's a little bit more? It doesn't matter, and then you sort of go a little bit more. It's like, yeah, well, we've come this far, what's a little bit more? And that continues to the point where we are so far away from what the original rules of the game were, that we no longer have rules that we abide by, we have rulers that we listen to. And that's this like really important distinction, is, we're no longer playing by a rule book that we are all held accountable to. We are playing under a set of completely changing rules that are just made by a set of rulers who just create the shit out of fucking whim.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, which is true, but it's fraudulent and it's treason. And there needs to be accountability and there needs to be punishment, because if we don't put a stop to this, then they're just going to continue to take over. us and attempt to become a dictatorship, you know, we will end up living like a draconian measures, you know what I mean? And it's hard. Like, I get what you're saying, like over time things have changed, but in my opinion this was on purpose, because we created the government to serve and protect us, and they've switched it around now, and they've just totally taking advantage of us, and that can't be happening. And I understand the people in power, if you were in power, would you want the same? I wouldn't want that. I'd want to live I wanted to live under natural law and not be exploited my whole life. And I'm
you say
sure
that, but see, you wouldn't then see. This is the interesting thing, is that people who have that opinion, which is what you just said, is like, I want to live under natural law and I don't want to, you know, rule over anybody. That's the kind of person who is generally not inclined to go and be a ruler. So the kind of person who is inclined to be a ruler and want to, you know, so-called lead the people, they're more inclined to be the one that doesn't want to be held accountable. So you basically, like, the kind of people that politics caters toward is the kind of person who doesn't have the same opinion as you. You know what I mean?
yeah, for sure.
So my question was going to be like, you know, you mentioned this can't be happening, it's fraud, it's treason, which I agree with you. Why do you think it keeps happening? Because we seem to keep playing the same fucking tune all the time. Yeah, why do you think it keeps happening?
Well, I think that a lot of it's got to do with people forgetting and not realizing what our power actually is, and allowing these people to get away with it. So they haven't been teaching the Constitution in schools since the 1960s, and for very good reason. They don't want us knowing what the Constitution stands for, and how everything that's been passed through now totally go against the Constitution. And that is a way of filtering out and sort of dumbing down the people so that you can get away with this sort of stuff. Do you know what I mean? And it's really interesting. Yeah, I just think a lot of it's got to do with, as well as our compliance and being distracted. Like I said, having to work to survive, and we have all these distractions now. I mean, we go out partying, we watch our movies, and we get, you know, stuck in our romantic series, our dramatic Bold and the Beautiful, that we just forget what's really happening behind the scenes that are so important. And I think this generation has been the worst because of technology, and because of how much we've been kept distracted and not realizing what's been going on, and our focus has totally changed. Back in the day when you didn't have all these things like technology, and people would put a stop to this stuff straight away because they'd see what's going on. It's never come to this point. It's never been this bad. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I did a podcast with Zuby. If you know him, he's a rapper in England. He's sort of been against the lockdowns from, you know, very early on and everything. And we did a podcast together, and I was saying, look, I said, you know, technology is a double-edged sword, right? Technology enables the capacity for us to have this kind of conversation from different sides of the world. So it's got these benefits and stuff, but at the same time, in the hands of hysterics, in the hands of weak people, you know, hysteria can spread, stupidity can spread, and like they actually, the whole this COVID thing that we're experiencing now is like, it was attempted with the swine flu in 2012, but the virality of online information was just not there, so it fell on its fucking face, like it died in the ass. Whereas, you know, in 2019, the world is so interconnected that stupidity was able to spread like wildfire. Like, everyone categorically within a space of 4 weeks lost their fucking minds. Like, the entire world lost its mind. Like, fucking people beating each other up over fucking toilet paper, afraid to fucking talk to each other, locking themselves in their house, snorting fucking coke while watching Disney. Like, honestly, the whole world categorically lost its mind. And like you said, I wouldn't say I'd be cautious to say it's not because of technology. It's because in a world where connectedness is made efficient, when you mix that with a world in which, for example, you know, I've got an article that I wrote, which is a longer one, called Utopia and Dystopias, and I talk about the difference between optimizing society for safety or for freedom. Freedom is dangerous. Freedom is uncertain, but freedom builds strong individuals, and freedom is where growth emerges. Freedom is where the capacity to think for yourself and be sovereign emerges. Whereas optimizing a society for safety is one in which you have this veneer of safety, but it's kind of like the analogy I gave earlier. It's like the walls that protect become the walls that imprison you. So it's like, you know, when you optimize a society for safety, what you do is you weaken the constituents of society. You shelter, you cushion, you know, you put them inside a comfort zone, metaphorically speaking, where they no longer grow. And what we've done, particularly over the last, you know, there's a site you should check out called WTF Happened in 1971. And it sort of shows where the world came off the gold standard and how all sorts of things, from obesity to debt to fucking all sorts of divorces and everything you could think of, all these statistics started going off the charts, basically. From that kind of point, and also from earlier on, like, we started to optimize for safety. And what we've done is we've created weak collectives instead of strong individuals. And when you take a weak collective and you throw in a bit of chaos, a bit of fear, a bit of uncertainty, a bit of doubt, and you wrap that in something where the world is interconnected, I mean, it's almost, I'm surprised that this didn't happen. Like, you know, like it was a perfect mix, you know, like,
yeah, for sure.
that
Perfect recipe
idiot,
for like
exactly,
taking over.
perfect recipe for blind hysteria. Like that idiot Niall Ferguson, who was the guy who did the original model saying that everyone's gonna fucking die, he's been doing this for 15 years. He did the same predictions for the swine flu. He did the same predictions for every other fucking flu for the last 15 years, and he's been wrong every single time. And again, statistically speaking, he's completely wrong again. But this time he managed to, you know, get it in front of enough moron bureaucrats who decided to pay the media, or have the media who kisses their asshole decide to spread the FUD. And then, I mean, humanity is as much to blame as the institutions that are pushing this agenda, which is, you know, like the amount of people I run into on a daily basis who are like not only conformist and actively conformist. Oh, we must do this. Like, you know, like man, the amount of arguments I've had with just stupid people, but also the people who don't believe it, but just go with it anyway. They're just as fucking guilty, if not more. It's like, when you know something is a lie, you know, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who's the guy who wrote the Gulag Archipelago and helped bring down the USSR, he has a famous saying, which is, the simplest act of human courage is not participating in the lie. And that's honestly what I loved about, you know, when I saw your video. I was like, man, he's someone who's got fucking courage. Because that's like, if there's anything lacking in the world, like the real pandemic in the world today is a lack of courage. It's seriously what it is. Like, if people actually grew some fucking balls,
Yeah.
And disobeyed, you know, like another great saying I love is, what is it? In the face, civil disobedience in the face of tyranny is a virtue, or something like that. It's, you know, like people think that, you know, disobedience is a bad thing, but we must, in the face of tyranny, we must disobey. Like, courage is not following rules. Courage is following what's right, despite what the rules say. So anyway, I've gone on a mad tangent there. I don't even remember what the fucking original point was. But I'll throw it over to you for comment.
No, like, and I think the media has been a massive weapon in all of this.
100%.
And I think the biggest misconception is that the media is there to tell us the truth, and they're they have an obligation to tell the truth, and they're the ones that will tell us everything that's happening. They are a business. They need you to be in fear for you to continue watching their crap to get money. Do you know what I mean? Like, and people don't realize how how insane it is that how we're worshiping the media, and we're clinging on to every word they say, but they don't have an obligation to tell us the truth. And I think it's like 6 people in the whole world own all the media. So, you know, if they are compromised individuals, then we ain't going to be getting true news, that's for sure. And that's part of this whole how we've gotten here. I think they're a major player in why people are so afraid and so subservient to all of this, you know.
I mean, it's the classic, if it bleeds, it leads. So when you take that idea and then you compound it with the fact that the media is now an arm of the institution that supports it, which is the government, then what you have is a perfect, again, recipe for compliance, which is, you know, we want people to think a certain way. And it's funny, it's like, this has been happening. Sorry about the noise in the background, fucking cicadas. This has been happening for God knows how many years. I mean, Hitler did the same thing. The USSR did the same thing. Every draconian government has done the same thing. China does the same thing today. But everyone is like reading off the same playbook. Have you ever read George Orwell's 1984?
I haven't read it, but it's on my list.
Okay.
I've heard about it and I've listened to, you know, podcasts about it, but
yeah, I mean, George's work was incredible. So he's got, like, that's a great one. Animal Farm is a really great one as well. And he was a powerful thinker who originally started off as a fucking socialist, but then started seeing the fallacy around socialist thinking and realizing that, holy shit, this is an impending disaster, because he was sort of he was on the left because he was originally seeing how the fascist right was, you know, breaking down the world. But the idiots on the other side have actually killed more people than Hitler would have ever dreamed of killing. You know, so when you combine Stalin and Mao and fucking all these other commies, like they've done way more than Hitler could have ever hoped to do. But, you know, and so sort of George Orwell ended up, you know, writing a bunch of really powerful pieces. But the thing about 1984 is he literally, you know, in there he talks about how one, you know, 3 powerful mechanisms for control is doublespeak, which is you say something but you mean something else. So they say, you know, one of the slogans of the government in 1984 is this, you know, war is peace, freedom is slavery, and I can't remember the third one. But basically, they mess up the meaning of words so that they lose meaning from people's minds. So that way, people are always in a state of confusion. So that was one strategy that the fictional government, Big Brother in 1984, used to basically dumb people down. The other one was the limitations of vocabulary. So the literal ripping of words out of vocabulary to narrow the capacity for any human being to describe life and experience and circumstance. And in doing so, what that does is, like, you know, the language, what most people don't realize is how, like, through language, we experience the world internally. And, you know, a great example of that is if you go live in a different culture where they speak a completely different language, you have a different experience in terms of how you perceive and you live the world. So we're seeing this today like a playbook. It's like, instead of 1984 acting as like a warning, the fucking clowns in government have decided to use it as a playbook. They're like, oh, this is a good idea. Let's just say science for shit that's not science and confuse people. Let's start making it illegal to say this word and do this and this and this and this. So, you know, starting to rip out vocabulary. It's like fucking textbook 1984 shit happening, you know, right before our eyes. And everyone thinks it's normal. Everyone's like, oh, we'll go. It's okay. It's not that bad.
Yeah. Well, they say this isn't a war of weapons, it's a war of psychology. Psychological warfare, on a massive scale.
It 100% is. Well, and this is the thing, is because it's like physical warfare now, I would argue, is too overt, A, too much of a shock, B, and three, potentially too catastrophic, because there's too many fat fingers. They can just wipe us all out, and they're like, well, let's just not do that. Let's just fuck everyone's brains, and that'll be an easier way to do this shit, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I mean, the mind is so important. And when you have control of someone's mind, that's it. Do you know what I mean? They'll do anything. They'll be the perfect little slave for you.
Correct. You don't even need control. You just need a level of influence, and you sort of stir the pot a little bit. And again, if you've conditioned people to value safety over freedom, then it's very, 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 very easy to lead them down like a rat, down the maze where you want them to go. I want to circle back to, again, the question we asked earlier was, why do you think this keeps happening? So it's happened so many fucking times this century alone, let alone in prior centuries. We seem to keep repeating. And you said one good thing, which I believe in, which is new generations forget. People don't fucking read history. They assume that they live in their own little bubble, and each generation of the world has its own distraction. So this generation is social media. The prior generation was TV and MTV. The prior generation was news. The prior generation was fucking newspapers. So everyone's got their distraction, right? So people forget to read history. So I think that is fundamentally important. But why else do you think we keep repeating the same mistakes?
Why else? Okay, let me see. I think it's human nature to want someone else to be responsible for you as well. Does that make sense? And yeah, it's human nature to not. I think people have lost the ability to think for themselves, and they're constantly needing to be told it's this and it's that, rather than becoming critical thinkers, looking at what's going on and using your own brain. It's like we feel safer when we have a higher authority telling us how it is and what we need to do. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
mm-hmm.
I don't know why we have this aspect to us. It's not all of us. I mean, us critical thinkers who know what's going on, we've been able to identify what's going on and see that. But a lot of people, I don't know if it's because of fear, because they're scared or whatnot, but they really rely on an authority to tell them what to do, rather than thinking for themselves. Do you know what I mean? It's interesting, and I think that's a pattern that's happened throughout the generations, with authority figures, people relying on them and them being their saviors, rather than standing in your own power, taking responsibility for yourself, and not listening to an external person that you deem to be so much wiser and knows what's best for you. Like with Hitler, I mean, they thought that they thought that what he was doing was right, and they truly stood for what he was talking about back in the day.
Yep.
Now.
So okay, so this tendency towards pushing responsibility off to a third party, right, is potentially one of the ramifications. Yep. Okay. Yep. I would agree with that. Now, why do you think we have that tendency as human beings? Like, what's the actual functional benefit of having a third party that we can rely on for particular information?
I would say self-doubt, insecurity, a lack of self-worth maybe as well. It's just I think it stems from insecurity and not believing in yourself and your capabilities and your ability to discern.
I agree with that. My question was more about what's the positive side of outsourcing authority
Oh,
or decision
oh,
making?
it's a
What's the
positive
positive
to
side
it.
here? Yeah, what is the positive? Because there
Look,
is a biological, there is a clear biological reason why we do it. So I'm testing you here.
Okay. What, like a sense of security?
Sort of.
Or is
Sort
it
of.
because of like we've grown up with parents and like they're like our parent as well? Is that what you're trying to get at?
Kind of, yes. That's actually part of where it stems from. But there's also a social. There is a biologically functional reason why we outsource authority, and it's to do with the fact that we are biologically social creatures. I'm trying to I'm trying to guide you towards this one because I think it's really important to understand, because the thing about outsourcing authority to a third party, it's actually very efficient. Like, the thing is, you can't be an expert in medicine, in carpentry, in driving, in gardening. Like, you can't physically do everything as a human being, right? So what we do is we create through reputation, through trust, through knowing people, etc., through communities, through trusting a someone that you trust someone else. We actually have evolved as human beings to trust some level of authority, and I think that's actually very functional. The problem is that it doesn't work at scale. And this is something where a lot of people get confused, is that they look at these drawbacks that we've had. So like this passing responsibility onto someone else is in a micro level, it actually works. So like if I want to run a company, I have to have the ability to pass the responsibility for different functions of the business onto different people, right? And I need to be able to trust them to do their job. Like, I'm not a software developer, so I hire software developers and trust them to do that, and blah, blah, blah. Now, that trust, that outsourcing of the authority comes with a potential cost, which is you could be very, very easily led astray. So this is where, on a small scale, the system itself can correct itself, because at a small scale, one element can't be catastrophic, or it can't create what's called fragility inside the system. But when you start to enlarge the system, when you start to enlarge the community or the society, and you build layers of trust, what you end up doing is you create fragility inside the system, such that nobody actually knows how to recorrect it. So the system doesn't correct, it actually collapses. And the thing is, before it collapses, it just decays to the point where it's completely devoid of any responsibility or of any accountability. And that's what we're seeing happening in the world today, is that over time, again, this is what I was sort of talking earlier about, that sort of step-by-step approach, is that over time, it was just easier to like, okay, yep, they'll deal with that, we'll outsource this. And it's sort of like that scales up. But this is where I believe, like, in a concept called localism. I don't believe a nation state the size of Australia can function. I don't even think a state the size of New South Wales can function. I think the world can only function in, I believe the world should be 1 million small cities instead of 200 large countries, because human beings are different, and trust and this ability to pass responsibility and authority can only scale to a certain degree. Anything larger than that, it'll always trend towards what we're seeing today in the world, which is this push towards a fucking globalist agenda and one group of people being the trusted authorities for everybody else. And that is super, super, super fucking dangerous. That can only happen when we try and do things at large scale, as opposed to things at small scale.
But so in saying that, I think that is done on purpose, in the sense that, for example, when I went to school and I graduated in year 12 and I left school, I still had no idea about mortgages. I had no idea about registrations and taxes and all these things that I was never actually taught. And I think that the educational system is purposely structured so that we are heavily reliant on the government, and that is what they want. Because at the end of the day, knowledge is power. Imagine if they taught common law at school. You know what I mean? Like, and so I just think that it is purposely structured so that we don't know enough to be at their level. They want us to be below them, and they want us to be reliant on them. And as a naturopath, my job isn't just to prescribe herbs and supplements. I need to empower my client. I need to teach them about diet. I need to teach them about lifestyle. Because at the end of the day, it is up to them. It is those factors, your lifestyle, your diet, your way of thinking, that is actually the common factors to what is controlling their health, their hormones. And so this is why I always think that knowledge is power, and everyone should be equipped with that. And this is why I think that the government really try their best to control what we learn and what we don't learn. It's part of their system. They want us to keep much lower than them. And
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I'm writing an article at the moment called "What has the government done to our education system?" Which is, I don't believe we have education anymore. And
No.
you know what the government did was it standardized education, turned it into what's called schooling. Schooling isn't about education. Schooling is about rote learning, and what that means is, you know, just us, like, you're a young individual, you're impressionable, you're free thinking and all of this. Then we take this young individual, we put them into a fucking sausage machine for 12 years. We beat the shit out of any individual thinking, and, you know, pop them out the other end knowing the same rote learning shit that everybody else knows. And that is, I agree, by design. And I think at this point, you know, government schooling has evolved, it's evolved even further. So, you know, you've got education and you've got schooling, which is much worse. Now I call it state indoctrination, which is it's not even about, you know, they're basically replacing STEM, like, so things like math and science and everything, they're replacing it with fucking opinions and gender studies and whatever the fuck other bullshit they're trying to put into stuff. So it's literally indoctrination. So I would 100% agree with you. So I guess coming back to it, you know, again, the Constitution didn't start this way. Why do you think it started to devolve? Why is it that this stuff is removed from, you know, the learning process?
Oh, because they don't want us to know what our rights are. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So when they want to take control over our lives, we're going to be completely submissive.
So why do they want to take control of our lives?
Because, well, look at what they've been doing. They've been exploiting us this whole time, and you know, taxing us and making us pay registrations. We're making them. There's a 1%, like people say. There's a 1% that are wealthy, and they're just feeding off us while we're just distracted, working our butts off, paying all these taxes, tolls, registrations, fines, fees. It's power, lust for power, greed.
Interesting. So where, like, again, you know, let's say I'll use America, because America's Constitution was you know, was founded on, I think, stronger principles. But so America's Constitution, you know, freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, and, you know, all these other amendments and everything. So the original idea of the American dream was, I believe, one of the most powerful ideas. It was this thing about, you know, sovereign individuals separating themselves from an overlord, and instead of being ruled by rulers, we come together by consensus on a set of rules that we all live by, and then we empower an institution to help enforce those rules, or to help ensure that those rules are things. So again, where do you think that kind of went wrong? Like, what do you think happened? Where did the wheels fall
what
off?
happened was, so we created the government, like I said, to serve and protect us, and to maintain some sort of natural law, and to punish those who harmed another or trespassed or damaged, for there to, who've committed a crime, there needs to be a victim that has had harm or loss, right?
Correct.
And
so that's
why
called a
we created
private property infringement, by the way. But anyway, go on.
Yes. And also to manage the affairs of the country, like to build the roads and all that kind of stuff, kind of not really.
That's never been the role of government. But anyway, that's actually come a lot later. That's actually part of where things go wrong. But anyway, like what you were saying at the beginning was 100% right. The shit about roads and infrastructure and stuff is completely fucking wrong. That is not the government's job.
No. Okay.
No. But anyway,
anyways, over time, you've had corrupt politicians and representatives who have used legislation. And mind you, legislation is not law, and legislation is for legal fictions. So it's for corporations, not living men and women. And they've put through legislation which benefited them in the end. And these legislation include that you need to register your car, you need to get a license, you need to, you can't go 10 kilometers over the speed limit or whatever. All these ridiculous rules, which is feeding into their pockets and restricting us and controlling us more and more. And we've forgotten what the government is for. We've forgotten that we created the government. We are therefore above them, because the creation of man can never be above man. And that we actually tell them what we want. And that's why we had a jury back in the day to make sure that all legislation was serving us. But then over time, they got rid of the jury, and they're just sort of, they're the ones that are running the show. There's no one there to intervene and be like, hang on a minute, this is breaching our human rights. We need to get rid of this legislation. So, but yeah, that's what I think has happened over time. It's just total corruption and greed, power. People who have put into high positions that weren't of integrity, which I think that there is an agenda behind all of this. Yeah, but that's another rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think you're definitely on the right track. So if I may, sort of
Sure.
talk you through where I believe things started to really, go off the rails, and this sort of, I would highly recommend. I mean, I almost know the rabbit holes you've started to dig down. I would highly recommend everyone listening to this, but also yourself, to read up on by a guy called Murray Rothbard. Okay, and he's one of the most powerful political, economic, and philosophers, I think, who ever fucking lived since the beginning of time. And he breaks all of this down, like from the point of how the Constitution was formed, how it emerged, and where things started to fall off. But I'll try and give a summary here, which is what you were saying earlier, where I pulled up and said, government doesn't have anything to do with, building roads or building infrastructure, is the original purpose of the government was purely the protection of private property rights. That's it. Private property rights are the cornerstone of individual sovereignty and the cornerstone of all natural rights. And I actually want to write a book on this some stage, because I believe private property rights emerge from the biological imperative of the requirement for territory for all living species. All living species, we sort of navigate our environment, we navigate our lives through understanding territory. Whether you look at lions, birds, fucking insects, everything operates within this sort of kind of like an imaginary boundary, but it's concept of territory. And the anthropological implementation of that, or the human version of that, is private property. And private property starts with you. You're your first bit of private property, and then that which you mix your time and labor with becomes your private property thereafter. So like if you find some unclaimed land and you decide to work that land, that is your private property. And we put together these institutions, and we voted representatives in with the role of protecting that private property against, like you said, trespass, theft, or something like that. Because all infringements are actually private property infringements. Anything that's not a private property infringement is actually a fiction. Like, you know, like me smoking some fucking weed, for example, is not a private property infringement on anyone. But like you said earlier, it's like it's just been legislated out of thin air by some assholes with some opinions that this is somehow bad or illegal. It's not fucking illegal. It's your opinion of what is legal. Whereas, you know, all infringements, all infractions are infractions on private property. So where things, I believe, started to go wrong, and there's actually two important points, is one is the idea that early on, people who were representatives in government decided that, oh, maybe the government should also do this. Maybe the government should also do that. You know, roads is a great example. The government should maybe build roads. Well, what if we tax everyone and say, look, we need to collect some money and we need to build some roads. You know, we need to build this infrastructure. You know, I mean, hospitals weren't around then, but let's just say hospitals as an example. But the government took steps to basically grow outside of the narrow confines of what it was supposed to be, which is a protector of private property, into an institution that wanted to provide services, which private individuals can perfectly fucking provide themselves through the very, very important creation of a corporation. The whole point of a corporation is individuals coming together and creating a legal entity to perform or to provide a product and service to other private individuals who may or may not voluntarily want to take part in that service. So for example, if I'm a car company and I want to sell cars, the incentive for me is to go out and build a fucking road. We don't need a government to come and build the road for us by taking the money from everybody else and then building unnecessary shit that we don't fucking need. It's like, you know, need drives innovation. And sort of,
yeah,
as the government started to grow, it started to, you know, encroach on, you know, things that the private sector should have been providing on its own. Now, the biggest change, and this is where things get really nasty, is the government at some stage, and this you know, really started to accelerate in 1913 with the advent of what's called the Federal Reserve in America, is that they decided to give themselves the monopoly on the ability to print money, or the monopoly on the ability to dictate what is legal tender. Before that, you know, legal tender was what the market chose, and the market is just all of us private individuals. When they took that over, the whole fucking game changed. Because what it meant was, and this is such an important point, and this is, for example, why I'm a Bitcoiner, is when somebody has the capacity to create out of thin air that which measures what the rest of us trade our time and energy for, they have the ultimate power.
Yeah, 100%.
Doesn't matter what you and I do. You know, if you and I can go and change governments, we can bring democracy back in, we can, you know, we can change the leaders, we can do all that sort of stuff. So long as the institution itself has the monopoly on printing money or has the monopoly on the creation of money, it will always devolve back into the same thing. And this is sort of like, I did a series of podcasts with Pete Evans. So he's been obviously vocal about all this shit for a while now. And I kind of tried to, you know, we in the Bitcoin space call it orange pilling, but, you know, effectively red pill the fucker on, you know, understanding that, you know, we can sit here and, you know, scream fraud and, you know, this and that and all this sort of stuff, but it doesn't actually change anything, because all we're going to do is put the next set of crooks into power. Or even if it is the first generation, like, for example, post World War II, you had the Nuremberg trials and, you know, people who one could argue were good people come into politics and sort of come in and try and rebuild the world. They sort of came in, but, you know, a generation or two later, here we are again, you know? So it's like we keep doing the same shit over and over again because the tendency towards corruption exists at the level of the system. It doesn't matter, like it's sort of, the train is headed off the cliff and all we're doing is changing the train driver and we think we're making a difference.
We're not actually dealing with the root cause.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the root cause is the fact that a monopoly on a couple of things exists. A monopoly on money, that's what actually feeds the whole thing. Then a monopoly on violence. So the government is the only institution that has a monopoly on violence. They can beat the shit out of you in, you know, for the protection of the greater good or whatever the fuck other reason they want to give. If you go and do what a police officer does to the average person, go slap someone in the face, you go to jail. Police officer does that, it's okay. They can go overseas, they can kill people in foreign countries for the greater good or whatever other reason. But if you go and kill someone in a foreign country, you go to jail. So it's like the public-private system does not operate on the same rules, right? So you've got monopoly on money, monopoly on violence, and then you have the monopoly on morality and ethics, basically. And how that manifests is in legislature or what's called positivist law, which is the idea that they can create laws out of thin air based on what they think is right, which is exactly what you mentioned before, legislation. Like the way I kind of try and separate positivist law or legislation versus natural law is natural law is something that applies to everyone, everywhere, all the time. There is no fucking exception. Versus positivist law legislation is shit that applies to some people based on what some people think in some places some of the time. It's like, it's completely fucking abhorrent. But these two last ones that I mentioned, the monopoly on violence and the monopoly on morality and ethics, has to be funded by something. You cannot do that at large scale unless you're able to keep yourself in economic significance. You have to be able to fund yourself in doing that. And again, the way the government does that is through taxation and through money printing. They basically create that shit out of thin air. Like money is the most important human invention ever. And like, I don't think people understand that, you know, there is no way for society to function without money. Like money is the meta idea. It's the language that has permeated society from the beginning of time. Money is the language of human action. Like when you perform a function, when you perform work, when you add input into society, you've taken the two scarce resources that you have, which is your time and your energy, and you've traded that, you've input into society, and you have to measure that somehow. So money is sort of like the meta idea. But what's happened over the millennia is that we've used different objects to represent money. And now we've got to the point where, you know, gold was one of the best representations of money because you can't print it, you can't create it out of thin air, it's scarce, it's durable, it's portable, it's divisible. Like it had all these good attributes.
And it has
had some
value.
downside. Well, it doesn't have value. No. Gold doesn't have value. See, this is another crazy idea that a lot of people, you know, misinterpret. Gold has no value. Like nothing actually has value outside of what we interpret as individuals.
Yeah.
Exactly. So for example, if you're dying of starvation, how valuable is gold for you?
Not at all.
Zero. Fucking doesn't. Exactly. Yeah. So value is completely, I think a lot of people get confused. A lot of the conspiracy, the guy that you mentioned, you know, aliens coming here to mine gold, it's completely fucking obscene because gold doesn't actually have any value. It doesn't mean anything. It was just a very good object to represent the product of human labor. Now, we made gold more powerful initially by issuing certificates against it. Go on. Actually, I'll let you go for a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. No, sorry. I was just thinking it's an essential metal that has use in technology as well, like gold, I believe. I'm no scientist, but according to Zeitgeist, these Anunnaki, they valued gold because of its use in society, in the sense of what it did for their technologies, if that makes sense.
I mean,
So,
one might argue that. So gold can be used as an industrial metal. And
yeah.
yeah, I guess in that sense, it's a valuable resource. Okay, that I'll agree with. Gold does have has an industrial use. So
it's not just putting it on your ring and your earrings. Like, scientifically, the components and the structure of gold can be used for technological reasons as well, if that makes sense. And these Anunnaki
absolutely
had a way of utilizing that, apparently, according to Zachariah Sitchin, for their...
we humans use it.
Yeah.
Like gold is one of the best conductors. It is unique as a metal because it's inert. It is chemically stable at at what do you call it, room temperature, like, and it does not corrode, it doesn't react with anything. So it's an incredible metal. But that's what made it also very useful. Like, it emerged as the best object to represent money, because again, money as a meta idea that permeates society. It's money is the language, like a sort of human action, and we have to measure that in order to interact as human beings. Like, if we cannot measure the product of our labor, if we cannot measure human action, society doesn't exist. Civilization doesn't exist in the absence of money. And
unless we go back to trading.
Okay, well, talk me through this. How do you trade without money?
Well, I have an object or an item that you desire, and then you have something that I desire. So we just swap.
Okay, but what if you don't have anything that I desire, but you desire what I have?
Well, suppose that's where people have to utilize their skills and start maybe growing food, growing veggies, making things, inventions. Do you know what I mean?
How do we measure? Okay, so how do we measure the relative value of the different things that people are doing?
I guess that's measured by the individual and how important that particular item is for them, and whether they're willing to give away whatever they have for that item in return.
So then so let's say you got a community, someone's gardening, someone's got horses, someone's building a house, someone's, doing something else. Like, how do they all figure out like what the relative differences are so that they can actually functionally trade?
Well, I think I'll go back to what I said initially. Like, it just really depends on how important, how much that one needs that particular item. And I don't know, like, or for back in the day, didn't they used to say like, I'll give you 5 plums or something for like one of that, because 5 plums is not, 1 plum is not equivalent to one of that, so I'm going to give you 5. Make sense? Because it's
so you're describing barter. You're describing barter.
Yeah.
But see, barter doesn't scale beyond about 5 or 10 people. So how, in a world where there's countless people who are doing countless different things, how do we actually measure the relative difference of what we all subjectively value and of the different inputs that we actually input?
And that's when we just got to work together and figure it out. I don't know.
It's money.
Yeah.
It's money. So you actually don't, you see what I mean? So think of money in a deeper level here, Doris. It's like, money is an idea. Money is a metaphysical thing that permeates everything that we do. Like, you can't, like, this idea of working together, what you're describing is actually money. Is like, you and I cannot, like, if you're a good cook and I can fucking go and hunt meat and someone else can, cook vegetables or whatever, grow vegetables, like, we're all doing a different level of input. And I might want those vegetables really, really, really badly, but someone might not want my fucking meat. So relative value needs to be measured somehow. Like, and this is the function that money plays, is that it allows us all to do what we want to do.
It's like the tangible representative to our energy and our time.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
I get what you're saying.
So that has to be measured somehow. And this is where something like gold was important, because you could say, all right, I've done this much work, and somebody, I've created this product or service or whatever, and somebody else finds this really important. They're willing to give me, a unit that represents how much they individually value it, but they derived that unit because they've created something that someone else valued. So the money circulates. So all money is like, if you think about it, it's like a global ledger of work. And all we're doing is we're all doing work, we're all doing input, and the ledger is just changing. And those who do more work or add more value, whatever, they can accrue more money. The problem is, and this is where the society is kind of fucked up at the moment, is we've got what's called fiat money. Is that we're all playing by this game, which is you and I are trading our precious resource, time and energy. So we measure that in this thing called money. But some arsehole over here gets to just print it out of thin air.
Yes, that's right.
And the system is closed. So this is what we've lost in terms of society. And this is, I think, the root of all the problems. Is that people don't understand what money is. People don't understand money is this fixed constant, that it's kind of like the speed of light. It's a fixed constant in the universe that exists, and it permeates all of what we do as work. As human beings, like it's a representation of our labor. But governments and central banks have managed to confuse us into thinking that money is that which they print. And it's fucking not. That is not money. Like the shit that you've got in your wallet, the Australian dollar, is just a piece of fucking paper that some idiot in government or central bank has told you represents money. Now, it approximately does, because they don't print an obscene amount enough for you to basically wipe your ass with it, right? So it's like, it kind of performs some of the functions of money. Like you can take some Australian dollars today from someone who's done some work, and given it to you, and then you can go and buy something else with it. So it kind of functions. But the problem is that over time, it is devaluing. Like that's not what the product of your labor does over time. Why should work that you did 10 years ago be less valuable than work that you're doing now? Like it doesn't fucking make any sense. But they've indoctrinated us into believing that inflation is normal. And then by using their money and living within their legislation, which is only in this country, only the Australian dollar is legal tender. What that means is that they have then the power to forcibly take half of your paycheck just because they want to, because we need to build more roads, or we need to make the schools public or whatever.
Well, Alex, how do you think we can get around that? Like, do we go back to gold and silver, or what about crypto? What are your thoughts?
It is literally the only solution here is Bitcoin. Simple as that. There is no other fucking solution. So the reason
decentralized.
It's more than decentralized. Decentralization is one of the ingredients, but what's more important is Bitcoin is fixed in supply and it's censorship resistant. And that's the two things that matter here. Is Bitcoin's the only thing that we've ever had in history, which is it's a digital network that nobody runs, which has digital tokens on it, but it has a fixed amount of digital tokens that nobody can change. And what I mean when I say nobody can change it is you and I can go and copy the Bitcoin code and we can change that. We can say, all right, instead of 21 million Bitcoin, I believe there should be 42 million Bitcoin. But what it does in doing so, you create a copy of the Bitcoin network and you're on your own network. So you're no longer part of what everyone else is a part of. So you actually opt yourself out. So Bitcoin's protection is in its open source nature, is that anyone can change the rules, but as soon as you change a rule, you're out of consensus with everyone else. So you are by yourself on your own little network. And then everybody else is on the Bitcoin network. So think of Bitcoin like a constitution, like it's a digital constitution, which says there's this much money, an amount of Bitcoin gets created every 10 minutes, and by this rule, that it runs in SHA-256 hashing algorithm, blah, blah, blah. So it's a set of rules that all of us can validate and verify. And we have the voluntary capacity to opt into Bitcoin if we want to change something as an individual that nobody else is in consensus with, we can do so, but we're off the network.
That's
So
so cool.
it's fucking the most powerful thing that exists in the world today. So
Yeah.
and
Am I
what it does
correct to believe? Sorry, am I correct to believe that it's not created out of thin air, but it's done through mining with mathematical equations? So therefore,
correct.
there is something it's backed by, rather than someone just creating it off thin air. You know, like with with the Federal Reserve Bank. Yeah.
Correct. So there's a concept in Bitcoin called proof of work, right? So the problem that Satoshi Nakamoto, who is the founder of Bitcoin, who nobody knows who it is, which is one of the most powerful things about it, what he did was he solved what's called the double spend problem, but he also solved what's called the Byzantine generals problem. And what that means is, how do you get a group of people who don't know each other to agree on something who may be adversarial? And there's a reason this problem needed to be solved. Is, you know, for decades now, people have been talking about, can we build a private money that is decentralized, which means that it's running on multiple servers around the world, but that cannot be corrupted and that cannot be co-opted. And you know, the challenge here was that with banking, for example, you know, let's say you're with NAB and I'm with Commonwealth, right? If I send you $20, money hasn't magically flown from Commonwealth to NAB. All they do is they've got their internal ledger. So, you know, Commonwealth deducts $20 from my internal ledger and NAB adds $20 to your ledger, right? So it's an internal ledger. Now, we trust these institutions to do the right thing and to, you know, put the debits and the credits in their ledgers. Now, unbeknownst to us, they do all sorts of other funny shenanigans with their ledgers. Is that, you know, you deposit $1,000 into the bank and then they lend out 10,000, right? So they create all this, that's called fractional reserve lending. So they do all this sort of stuff, which distorts how the money that we're using is actually valued in the world. So what Satoshi Nakamoto said is, look, we need to have everybody running their own copy of the ledger. So that way, if some person changes it, they're out of sync with everyone else. They're out of consensus with everyone else. So that's a great idea in theory, but the question is, how the fuck then do you get everybody to agree on the same copy of transactions? Like, it's impossible. It's an unsolvable problem. And that's the problem that Satoshi Nakamoto solved by combining decentralized architecture with what's called proof of work, which is, he said that, like he instituted the capacity for anybody to run what's called a validator on the network. Now, what a validator does, it's also known as a miner. A validator runs a piece of the Bitcoin software, and as they're running the Bitcoin software, the transactions are coming on the network, and all these validators see all the transactions coming on the network. And every 10 minutes, they group a bunch of transactions, and they say, all right, this is going to be the transactions, and we're going to lock the block. This is where the word blockchain comes from. We're going to lock that block, and we're going to tie it to the transactions previously. Now, the one validator that is allowed to lock the block, he has to win a game of proof of work. And in order to win the game, you have to expend a bunch of electricity you have to solve a mathematical problem to try and find like this really, really low number, which is what's called like it's a hash function of a number. So it's basically impossible to find without doing a bunch of mathematical equations. Now, the computers doing that, they have to spend electricity to do that. Now, here's where it gets interesting, is if you've spent a bunch of electricity, and let's say you're one of the validators who found that magic number, but the copy of the transactions you've got are different to everybody else's, when the next block comes, the reward you just got for your previous block, you lose, right? So I'll take a step back for 1 second, is the incentive mechanism for these validators to do the work is that whenever you lock a block of transactions and move to the next one, Bitcoin is issued by the network to the winning validator, to the winning miner, right? Now, you, like, at the moment, there's 6.25 Bitcoin issued every 10 minutes. So 6.25 Bitcoin times 80 grand. So it's basically $500,000 is issued every 10 minutes, right? By the Bitcoin network to the winning validator. Now, if you're a validator that's done the wrong thing and you're out of consensus with everyone else by sliding a fraudulent transaction in the ledger or something like that, the probability of you winning the next block is lower than the probability of you and I during this podcast getting hit by an asteroid. Okay, it's basically fucking zero. So you'll lose the next block, and if you have a transaction in there that nobody else has on the network, or the next miner doesn't, you lose your block reward. So you have wasted all this electricity for no reason. So what it does by instituting a cost to play the game of proof of work, these validators are all trying to validate the correct set of transactions, and all coming to consensus every 10 minutes. So this is when people think about what's Bitcoin backed by. It's actually backed by work. It's backed by this. You cannot cheat the Bitcoin system, because all you do is you cheat yourself.
It's self-regulating. It self-regulates.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's amazing. Wow. I didn't know that. I've invested in it, but I didn't even know that.
It is the most incredible invention today. And here's like the ramifications. So without going into the minutia of how it works, the ramifications of Bitcoin are extremely profound. What it does is it demonopolizes the money. Remember before we said like where things went wrong is that the fact that the government or central banks have a monopoly on money. They can create whatever they want, and you and I don't. Like, if you and I go and create our own money, we get George Floyded. You know, we get a fucking boot to our neck and we get killed for having, you know, like, go print some money on your fucking computer at home and see what happens. You go straight to jail. But the government can do it. It's okay. So what Bitcoin does, it actually rips it out of their fucking hands. It says, here is a better money. It's more divisible. It's more portable. Like, you can carry the Bitcoin. You know, like Bitcoin makes money information again. So you can carry your seed phrase in your brain, and that gives you the capacity to access your fucking Bitcoin. So it's more portable, it's more divisible, it's more durable. Like, you can't destroy information. Information is fundamentally energy. It's more fungible, means that like Bitcoin is Bitcoin on the network. You can't fake it. Like, you know, the Bitcoin network doesn't recognize anything else that comes on it. So it's more fungible, it's more recognizable, and fundamentally speaking, and this is the most important attribute of money, it is scarce, or more importantly, in Bitcoin's case, it is fixed in supply. We can't print energy, we can't print time. And remember, that is when you and I trade time and energy, we trade it for the object that we know as money. So if Bitcoin is fixed in supply, it maps directly to time and energy. So it is a superior form of money. And in being a superior form of money, as people move towards it, and it sitting outside of any capacity for any government to control, we actually defund the clowns that are able to lock us down, force us to wear masks, wear vaccine, you know, take vaccines, register our fucking cars. It destroys their honeypot. And this is why governments fucking hate it. And it's the most important thing happening.
So when people say it's another agenda for the New World Order and all this crap, it's not. When you look at it,
they're morons. They don't understand it. Like,
it's against the governments.
Of course it is. It is the only tool we have in our arsenal, other than doing podcasts and talking to people. But we've seen what happens to people like us who are out there talking shit. Is we get censored, we get deleted off platforms, we get deplatformed, we get shut down. Like, so, you know, what do you have left? Think of it this way. Imagine a world where Bitcoin didn't exist, where if you, like, we're stuck with banks, for example, where if you have a different opinion, or if you don't take the vaccine, now all of a sudden you're not allowed to have a bank account. How the fuck are you going to eat? What are you going to do? Like, the ultimate control is the control of the money. That is game, set, match. The only thing that exists today in the world, other than physical gold, is Bitcoin. But the problem with physical gold is it's very easy for me to come and take your fucking gold. It's physical. Like, if you've memorized your seed phrase, I can't extract that from you. Like, so Bitcoin is far more powerful. And, you know, all these people running around talking about the agenda and all this shit, they're fucking dumb as dog shit. They just don't understand what Bitcoin represents. Like, I don't have to have an opinion on Bitcoin. All I have to do is download the Bitcoin software, run the software, see the rules. That's it. I can opt in to use it or not. I don't have to think about someone's opinion about whether this is fucking lizard people money, because it's there. It's in front of me. Like it doesn't, like, numbers, mathematics don't lie. It's not an opinion. It's a fact.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think so many people are going to, if they haven't already, they'll probably start investing into Bitcoin after that explanation.
Well, I think, like, my whole agenda here is, like, I fundamentally believe that like, I call Bitcoin the renaissance of responsibility. So, like, the reason I wanted to chat to you today again is, like, I've got on my list here is I want to transform you into a Bitcoiner, because it's sort of like, I in my mind, it's out of the 100 things we do. Yeah, well, look, out of the 100 things that we do, there's one thing that's kind of like the silver bullet. Like, it's the 1% of your effort that makes the 99% of the difference. And Bitcoin is that thing. Like, Bitcoin fundamentally, because it, like, again, coming back to what some of my beliefs are, is I believe in personal sovereignty. I think the most important thing we have as individuals is the capacity to choose and know what's right for our own private property, like you and I. And I know you believe that too, because you're a responsible person. Think for yourself. Like, we cannot have that living under a regime where our human action, the product of our labor, is run by somebody else, who obviously does not have our best, our
interest at heart. Yeah.
Our interests at heart. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, like, whenever I see, people, with the kind of passion that you sort of displayed to me, it's like, fuck, man, that is, like, we need more of that. But, it's almost impotent if we can't be sovereign. And you cannot be sovereign so long as you're playing by the game that you're trying to defeat. It's like, we're sort of locked in their game. Like, you can't do anything about it.
And we're part of the system. I work 2 jobs just for this money that they print out of thin air.
yeah. Like, they get to create it for doing nothing. You and I have to work our fucking asses off. So, like, and again, I don't want people to sort of get me wrong here. Is like, I believe in hard work. I work my fucking ass off. But what I want is that the work that I do and the money that I save, not to be devalued by some bureaucratic fuckwit who thinks that they can just create it out of thin air. Like, that is theft. Like, there is no, like, it is the textbook definition of theft. And we're all sitting here taking it, and not doing anything about it, except, some of us might be intelligent enough to, be reading and, talking about this stuff and slapping people in the face. But, like I said, it's so easy to get deplatformed. I was getting shadow banned like a motherfucker on Twitter. I got banned off Facebook. I had my bank accounts shut down because I was, too loud about my opinions on, government. So it's like, all sorts of shit. So it's like,
wow, that is so draconian, totalitarian.
It is.
Wow.
It is. But again, thank fucking Satoshi for Bitcoin, because, like, without that, like, I can't do anything. Like, I love the saying is, don't tell me what you believe, show me a bank account and I'll tell you what you believe. Like, so money literally represents what we believe, who we are, our human action, all of that. And if we give any institution the power to run that, they can do whatever the fuck they want. And we are, it is like, I honestly don't see any other hope. Like, it's just, we need to educate people. We need to be doing these podcasts. We need to do all this stuff. But the 1% that's going to make 99% of the difference is us opting out of their system, economically speaking, and placing it. So I always try and, like, transcend the argument. It's like, Bitcoin's not an investment. Bitcoin's your only safe haven. Like, if you're thinking of Bitcoin as an investment, you're sort of thinking about it in terms of how much money you're going to make. But that presupposes that you're just going to come back into the fiat system anyway. It's like, wait a minute, why do you want to do that? It's like the whole point of Bitcoin is to
Yeah.
exit.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I was actually thinking about that, and obviously, like when you want to sell your coins when you've made a profit or whatever, you're just selling back into the banks and the other system, and then they can even tax you. So it's
Correct.
like, that was my question. It's like, what do I do then? Is there a way that I can to purchase things just through Bitcoin, or yeah? So there
So I
are
mean,
ways.
Bitcoin, think about it. Bitcoin's like cash. Bitcoin is something that you can accept from anybody anywhere in the world at any point in time for whatever. Like, so let's say, for example, do you have another phone on you by any chance? I want to do an
Another.
experiment. I'm gonna, yeah. Like, do you have a, like, are you on the Zoom with your phone at the moment or your laptop?
Yeah, I
On
am.
your phone? Okay, bummer. Because what I was gonna do was, I was like literally gonna send you some Bitcoin from here now, from my wallet to your wallet, just a small amount, just so you can see, um, how easy it is. It's like the idea is that so long as you just have a wallet and you have an address. So think about like Bitcoin's, the way it works is like it's a monetary unit on a monetary network, or a
Yeah.
monetary unit on a financial network. So it gives you all the functions of money. So you don't actually need a bank, you don't need an intermediary, you don't need anybody else or anything to tell you that you can accept Bitcoin. So if you've got your
Wow.
address, anybody in the world, so let's say you perform a service for someone, let's say you do a naturopathy consultation, and this person is in fucking Timbuktu, right? And you help them and they're like, okay, how do I pay you? You give them a QR code with your Bitcoin address, they scan that, they send you some Bitcoin, and magically from the other side of the planet,
Wow.
doesn't matter about banks, what time it is, anything, it comes to you. That's it. Simple.
What about like, what about for groceries and essential services like food?
It,
Can you pay
yeah,
using?
it all depends on who's accepting it on the other end. So
So
this
you
is the
just need
thing.
to
So
find someone who's providing that service that you need, who has a Bitcoin.
exactly, exactly,
Oh.
exactly. That's all it is. Now we are very early. So think. So this is where people. This is where the investment case for Bitcoin comes. Is because we're so early. Because there's not many people that are holding Bitcoin or accepting Bitcoin as payment or using it as payment. You know, there's not a huge amount of money on the network itself. It's only $1 trillion, right? Like when you compare the $1 trillion market capitalization of Bitcoin with, I think gold is worth 12 trillion in total market cap. Like the amount of money around the world, like M1, M2, M3 base money, and base money is sort of like, I think 80 trillion or 100 trillion. Like Bitcoin's still a really, really small component. So it's got so much more growth to come. So as that happens, the price of Bitcoin, relatively speaking to other goods and services, will stabilize. At the moment, like if you have Bitcoin, you probably don't want to spend it because, like, you know, if you spend it today, remember there's a fixed amount and everyone wants some of this. Relatively speaking, the price of Bitcoin, it's just supply demand 101. It's increasing, right? Like if everyone wants something, like I use this example with Pete Evans. It's like if there was one Wagyu Kobe beef cow in the world, and everyone wanted it, how much do you think the cow would be worth? It'll be worth billions
Fixed.
because, you know, like
Yeah.
exactly. So Bitcoin is like, think of it as the best money, and it's fixed in supply, and it's still early on. So everyone's trying to, you know, acquire some who's got a fucking brain.
Mm-hmm.
And as they're acquiring, it's almost like, think of it as like territory. Like, let's say we found this new promised land and everyone's like trying to acquire some territory on this. Now, some people are selling some of the territory. They're like, yeah, I bought heaps early on, so I'll sell you some land and shit like that. And that's fine. And that's what basically the Bitcoin market is like when you're buying and selling Bitcoin, is there's some people who bought some early on who have a shitload, and they're like, you know, selling it back into the market because they might want to convert back into dollars for whatever reason they want. Now, they might only do that because they don't understand Bitcoin, or they actually need cash because the good or service that they want to buy on the other end, they can't pay for with Bitcoin directly, as an example, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, looping it back to what you said is us moving off the legacy financial system and onto a Bitcoin ecosystem is going to require more and more of us to be willing to accept Bitcoin as payment, and use Bitcoin as payment. But it's not something that sort of we're here one day and we're there the next. It's a transitionary phase, you know? So these days, I think I think the count is, 10,000 merchants around the world who accept Bitcoin for their, stuff. Like, I know for me, for example, like if I go speak at a conference or something like that, and they offer me a speaker's fee, I only accept it in Bitcoin. There's not a fucking chance I'm going to accept it in dollars. Like, what? Why would I degrade myself and take your fake government money? Like, I only accept Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So, more and more people are waking up to that, and that's sort of how we move off, if that makes sense. It's like it's transition. It's not a day and night. It's a movement.
Yeah. I think as well, because so many big people are jumping on board, more and more people are learning about it, and they're also starting to be open to it. But I think if people were to listen to what you just said and how you explained it, those who are aware of what's going on, they would be all for it. But I know people who are quite paranoid and they think it's like part of the agenda or something like that. It's just another trap, So I think it's really good that people need to hear what you just said, like how you described it all and how it's totally against what their system. And it's like freeing us. You know what I mean? It's amazing. I think that's so important. Hopefully, really, that would be the new system to replace this fraudulent one.
Well, what it does is like, and maybe we'll sort of trail it off here, but like, I've got this theory that, remember how I said earlier about like large scale nation states don't work because human collaboration doesn't scale beyond a certain amount. Like, and like a really good example is America's prior election, right? I mean, notwithstanding the fact that fucking Biden just scammed the entire election, let's just put that aside. Let's just assume that it was down the line that half of America wanted Trump, half of America wanted Biden. Like, that in itself is evidence enough that America shouldn't be one big government. It should be split up. Simple as that. So like, you can't force 50% of the fucking population to adopt a set of rules that the other 50% want because democracy. It doesn't fucking work like that. Like,
no,
things don't scale, right? So what America should do, for example, is America should split up into 50 states where they all govern themselves. Fuck this United States of America, should be the disunited States of America. Same thing in Australia. Break it down into states, like, and everyone governs themselves. Now, if Queensland, for example, says, yep, well, we want to entice people to come and live here, so there's no registration here, people can smoke weed, blah, 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 we have our rules. New South Wales says, yep, well, we want to be more strict, we want to, cater for like older retirees, so it's like weed's illegal here, and blah, 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 we have these processes and stuff. People can choose where the fuck they want to go. Like, the whole point of freedom is the capacity for the individual to choose, right? Like, if you can't choose, you don't have fucking freedom. Like that. That's how simple it is. Now, the only reason these governments can be so big and remove our capacity to choose is because they can keep themselves in business by printing money and taxing us. Now, when Bitcoin breaks that, what you end up having, and this is the framework that I'm trying to educate people on, is we move from an overlord subject relationship to a customer service provider relationship. And that's completely different, which is, if you don't, like, when an institution cannot keep itself in power through fraud, which is what money printing and taxation is, it has to provide a better service. So the vision I see of the future is private cities that all have their own flavor of governance. They might do things slightly different, like Amsterdam's a good example, Dubai is a good example. Like, you've got these sort of early remnants of this stuff, but I think it's going to proliferate all around the world. And because they can't print their own money, because everyone will be on a Bitcoin standard, you as an individual, the idea of being Australian or fucking Bulgarian or Turkish, it goes out the window. The idea of a passport goes out the window. You have Bitcoin, you want to go somewhere, you go there, and you pay for the things that you want. Maybe one city, offers policing and judicial services, and it's a flat fee every year for $10,000 a year, as an example. And you go and you live there, you get your basic services. Anything else, you just pay a la carte. If you don't have to put your forcefully put your fucking kid through a school. You a la carte choose from a private selection of offerings of, you know, this expert teacher who teaches specifically math, and they do it for, you know, kids aged between 6 to 12, and that's all they do, you know, like, like that is real freedom, not what we have today, which is we have to accept what it is that the government gives us off this fucking set menu, and that set menu is funded by the money they steal from us.
Yeah.
And if we don't like it, we get thrown in jail.
Yeah.
Yeah, what happened?
And
Yeah.
that goes back to why you were saying to you, choice is freedom, having choice, which makes so much sense when you explain this whole scenario. And that's, and I think that ultimately it will lead to that way, and it should be that way, where we can decide the way we want to control our lives and what we want to do, rather than an external authoritative body such as the government.
Correct.
And we can go back to those natural laws, like we know not to kill someone or not to steal their shit or like to damage their property. We know that. And so
you don't have to punish everybody for the mistakes of a few, right? Like, because you know, in that kind of a world, like, you know, this is where it's so important to like view the world through the lens of incentives, because when you understand incentives, you understand all human behavior. And this is sort of why, like, when I mentioned Rothbard's work, like, he will fucking open your mind to all of this, and you'll be like, holy crap, everything starts to make sense. The only thing that Rothbard was missing, was, you know, he wrote all his stuff between the I think it was the 50s and the 80s, is he was missing Bitcoin. Like, that was the missing fucking piece this whole time. It's an incorruptible money. And, you know, all of these sort of philosophies of, like, you know, free private cities, of like a libertarian type existence, of local type, you know, like communes and cities and everything like that, everything happening on a smaller basis. And that kind of customer service provider relationship versus overlord and subject relationship, like, that all is made possible when you defund the large state. Like, when the large state can't keep itself into business, it becomes accountable, because if you don't like it, you're going elsewhere. You know, it's like, you know, as a business, like, if you don't, like, if I'm selling furniture and someone comes in to my store, and I take a shit on the sofa and, you know, try and get them to buy it, they ain't gonna fucking buy it. They're gonna go to the next place. But the government thinks that the way it should be run is, the government's like, okay, we're going to own all the furniture stores, and we're going to take a big dump on all the fucking sofas, and then people are going to come in and we're going to say, you have to buy it. It doesn't work that way. Like, that's not how free societies function.
Yeah. So. And I think eventually, like, you'll have those ones who are, you know, totally, they worship the government and they're in a state of fear. They will stick with the government. But the ones who have had enough, who don't want that, who want to have choice, they will exit the system. And you kind of see like two different societies. It'd be really interesting.
100%. And I think that as that evolves, this will be really interesting to see, I think, over the coming decades, is you'll have these pockets of prosperity, of, you know, smaller functional societies working, and them being the ones that people look to and be like, fuck, maybe we should do what they're doing. And then you all of a sudden have the game theory completely change, is that you actually have other people wanting to do what you're doing on a small scale. And because they can't print money, they can't grow their edifice too much. So it, like, keeps things small and accountable. It's so fucking powerful.
Yeah. And I often say to people, so many people focus on what's happening, about the vaccines and about this and about that. And I say to them, forget that shit. They are keeping us on a wild goose chase whenever they're you know, doing something ridiculous and giving out all these restrictions and these rules. They're keeping us on a wild goose chase. Fuck all that. Find the solution. Find your way out of the system. Live in your truth. Stand in your truth. Lead by example. And then people will see and be like, holy shit, like, look at this person. They're totally free. They're doing what the fuck they want to do. Like, instead of trying to be like, oh my God, trying to convince people that the vaccine is dangerous or that the government is bad or whatever, that's not the way to go about it. The way is to lead by example and to live in your truth. And this is what you've just explained, and the whole Bitcoin thing. That's so part of all of that, you know, and it's so powerful.
It really is. So actually, you just touched on a thread that I wanted to pull on. So living your truth is something that, you know, I straight up saw, and, you know, I see it in your content and everything. So speaking of, like, you know, they're leading us on these wild goose chases, and, you know, people are fucking lost in hysteria and everything like that. So some of us have decided to be, you know, intelligent, like, you know, you've done the research and you've done all this sort of stuff, and you've, like, I love your little legal pack of stuff, which is like, you know, you want me to wear a mask? Well, here's this motherfucker, here's this. Like, here, I've got something funny here. I don't know if you can read this.
Face cover and mask exemption or exempt. I like that.
So I've got that. I've got a lanyard. I've got all this shit that I carry with me, which I use as, and you know, as much as this is complete bullshit, I just authoritatively say I have an exemption. Thank you very much. And, you know, I've been doing this for the last year, and people just shut the fuck up. Like, this is how much of a scam this is. So when I saw you, like, you've just taken it another level. I would love to talk the audience through some of the stuff that you've actually put together, because that was actually a big part of what I wanted to discuss, but we went on all these tangents. So can we dig into a little bit of that? Because my stuff is crude. Like, I've got a stupid lanyard and a fucking and a doctor's certificate in this, but your stuff is like really, really A grade. So talk me through this.
Well, pretty much it's just using the system against itself, right? And so there's all this legislation which these public health orders and state laws, these legislation take priority over these public health orders and state laws, such as the Discrimination Act, the Privacy Act, and Biosecurity Act. And pretty much, like, if they're trying to get you to wear a mask, you just say that you have a lawful medical exemption. And then when they say, can I see your exemption? That goes against the Privacy Act, because you don't have to disclose your personal medical information, and it ends there. And I don't know if you've seen people who have recorded police when they've harassed them, and it ended up turning bad because the police officer called his sergeant, and his sergeant said, that's correct, you have no authority to see this person's exemption. It does go against the Privacy Act. So there have been scenarios where that's been proven.
Awesome.
And even with these QR codes and having to check in, that goes against the Privacy Act. And then if you're not allowing someone in because they don't want to give you their privacy, that's discriminating against them. And there's just so many things that you can just use against them. It's amazing. And Biosecurity Act is a really big one. Only an authorized biosecurity health officer can actually give you a directive, and it has to be in your name, addressed to you, to wear a mask or to test. But that needs to be based on the fact that you're showing symptoms. And I don't think restaurant or cafe owners or shop owners are biosecurity health officers. Police officers are not biosecurity health officers. So it's completely unlawful. And there are ways around this. And just learning these basic laws will help you, will empower you. And it's really interesting, and it goes to puts things into perspective. The government does not give a shit about people, because they're turning business owners against the people who know about this stuff. And there's like this sort of like war going on now. It's like business owners are obliged to follow these unlawful rules and mandates because they're going to get a fine, but they're breaching people's human rights. So it's like they're turning us against us anyway. And it's really interesting what the government is doing, and how people haven't caught on to this, and how business owners are following their every word, and they're not realizing, hang on, this is unlawful what you're doing. But it's like, but that's from the government themselves. And it's like, yeah, because they don't give a shit about you. And it's so interesting when you look at it from that perspective as to what really is at play here. And I believe one of the agendas is that they want to get rid of small businesses, maybe this is one of the ways they're going to do it, by having us sue them or them getting fined for not following, it's just really interesting.
The idea of getting rid of small businesses, it doesn't even have to be an agenda. It's just I think it's a function of the incompetence of the idiots running the show, which is they are so fucking dumb. They are so incredibly incredibly arrogant to think that, for example, an economy doesn't need small businesses. It's like, oh yeah, well, we can just print the money and we can just give everyone handouts. Like, so what they want to do is they want to make everyone dependent on the teat of the state, because if you're broke, destitute, and you have nothing, then you will become a tool basically of the state, which is, wear a mask, jump how high, you know what I mean? It's like wear a mask, how many, jump how high. It's like this is sort of what's happening, and it's all because they sort of strip away shit slowly by slowly, and you're no longer a fucking sovereign individual. You're you're an extension of the state. You're a slave to what they want. So I love this idea of using the government's own stupidity against it. So for example, me personally, I don't believe in acts like the Discrimination Act and all that sort of stuff. I think any private individual should be free to discriminate against whoever they want to discriminate against. On a local level, it's fine, but using their own act against them is fucking genius. So talk me through, if I'm my sister asked me this question. I was like, I told my sister, I was like, I'm doing a podcast with this girl. I was like, you're gonna fucking love her, because me and my sister, we're both against this shit. She's back in Brizzy, and she's like, man, she goes, I'm like the only person who doesn't wear a mask. I'm surrounded by fucking losers. And I was like, yeah, you are. And she's like, what do I do to she's like, how do I do this in a way that kind of helps turn people around, but also doesn't take me half an hour to show a bunch of paperwork and explain why I shouldn't wear a mask. So could you talk me through a process of if you walk into a shop, what do you do that is quick, efficient, and works, with respect to the things that you mentioned?
Okay, so if I walk into a shop and they try to get me to wear a mask, I just say to them, I go, oh, I have a condition that exempts me from wearing a mask. And either they'll accept that and they'll let you through, or they're complete Nazis and they'll try and force it upon you. And so I have a few tactics. One, I may play the card that, I would say, look, I was, you don't know my story. And, I had a really traumatic experience which involved someone covering my face when I was younger. And then so it kind of really it's like, holy shit, you're getting into dangerous territory here, you better back the fuck off, you know what I mean? And if that person is a completely heartless, I don't know, absolutely terrible person, they'll continue to push it on you, you know what I mean? But they usually 99% of the time they won't. But then obviously, if none of your little tactics or strategies work, you then just say, I have a lawful exemption. And you can even say to them, call the police if you want, because the police know about these laws now. In the beginning they didn't, but now it's kind of like they need to know about it, because a lot of people are using it, and there's a lot of arguments and confusion behind it all. Or I had one that I used once. Someone asked me, so where's your mask? And I said to them, what did I say? I was like, did you know, I can't think of it right now, but it had something to do with the government being I was like, what was it? I have it in my Instagram somewhere, but I pretty much tried to turn it on them and was like, well, the government's protecting pedophiles, would you listen to a pedophile protector, kind of thing? And they were so shocked, I was like, oh, that's right. I was like, did you know about the suppression orders, the 90-year suppression order? And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, oh, well, the government's protecting 28 VIP pedophiles, including a former prime minister. And they were like, what? And I was like, yeah, so I don't listen to pedophile protectors, but thank you anyway. And I just walked off. She was like in total shock. So that was like kind of raising awareness to like the whole pedophilia side of things, as well as like the stupidity behind listening to these mandates and who you're actually listening to, you know? So I kind of killed 3 birds with 1 stone, if that makes sense.
Nice. Okay. So with the Privacy Act one, because I think that one is like really powerful. So you say that you walk into a shop, you say, I've got a lawful medical exemption, right? So I can't wear a mask. And then they're like, either say okay, or how many of them do you think ask you to produce the exemption? Like, do you have to show an exemption usually, or like? Because I'm just trying to figure out, when do people need to invoke the Privacy Act one?
Okay, so some people know to let it go. I find that's especially now, majority of people will, because they know about the Privacy Act and they know they can't have that authority to ask you for it. But when you go to real Nazi places such as airlines, they tend to ask you for your exemption. GPs, I think even the Apple Store, they're really Nazi about it, which makes sense because, you know, who owns Apple? But so when they do ask you, oh, can I just please see your exemption? That's when you say to them, actually, under the Privacy Act 1988, I'm not required to disclose my personal medical information to anyone, and you're breaching my privacy by asking that. And so majority of people will back up and they'll let you through. But I always say to people, just record just in case, because some will continue to push it because of their absolute ignorance. And so I also have notices where it has on there the acts that they're breaching, and you say, okay, can you just sign this just to say that you're aware of you're breaking the law, and you're still going to deny me service. I just need you to say that you're aware of that and I've told you. And they will not sign it. They'll freak out, and that is like your tool to get them to let you in and to just stop what they're doing. It has happened where even then they have not signed it, and they keep requesting for your exemption, and then they just deny you service. That's when, you know, you've recorded the whole incident, and then you can take that further and actually sue them, because that's discrimination and they've tried to, you know, breach your privacy. And so you can take that further. That's like ammunition.
I think that's a good one for the airlines. Like I'd hate to see, I guess, people, you know, like me, I fucking hate the airlines at this point, because I think the airlines are basically a beneficiary of the state, for example. So like, you know, particularly, you know, Boeing, for example, went bust last year, and what happened is they got a $50 billion fucking bailout from the government, and people are like, oh yeah, the government saved Boeing. It's like, well, no, the government didn't. The government stole $50 billion from us and bailed Boeing out. Like, but what benefit do we get from it? Nothing, except we get treated like fucking cattle trying to fly on a plane, even though we paid to keep these fucking morons in business. This is why, you know, economics is so important, why capitalism is so important, because capitalism means that if you do dumb moves, you actually go bankrupt. You know, what we have today is fucking socialism, which is if you fail as a business and you're close enough to the government gives you a handout, which they took from everybody else. But have you managed to fly without a mask? Like, have you done any flying? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And to what stage did the airline push you? Did it get to the discrimination, or did it just get to the privacy? Where did it get to?
It got to the privacy. Well, the first, on the way there, I just said I have a medical exemption, and I think it was with Jetstar. They were so good, they let it go. But Virgin, they're the Nazis, and they asked me for my exemption, And I said, under the Privacy Act, I don't need to show you that. And they did let it go, but I don't know if you heard about the recent experience. Do you know who Yusra Rose is? Yusra Rose.
No.
She's part of this whole activism and the movement. And she went to Melbourne and she flew with Virgin with 2 other guys. They went to a protest there. They're from Sydney, so they went to Melbourne to a protest. And on the way back, they said the same thing. They said we have exemptions. And then I think one of the flight attendants asked one of the guys, "Can I see your exemption?" And he's like, "You don't have any authority," and he just walked off. And then so what ended up happening after that is they picked on them. And so the head flight attendant came over and she's like, "You were rude to one of my staff. I'm going to kick you off." And they're just sort of, and what happened was one of them recorded her. And so she got angry that she was being recorded and she demanded their phones and to delete it. And then she just caused this massive, she just sort of, she was picking on them because they got away with not wearing a mask and found other excuses to kick them off their plane. She said she was being harassed, or I don't know, she played the victim pretty much. That's what you got to be careful of. Even if you get away with the mask exemption, they'll try and find other ways to kick you out. So don't give them an excuse, to be really polite about it, I suppose. But that's what I've heard has happened. And there is actually, she's going to be suing her, and there will be I think it's like a class action where a lot of people who have had these experiences with airlines, they'll sort of be joining forces because people have had enough. And these people are supposed to be providing you a service that you've paid for, and they're breaching your rights. You know what I mean? So it'll be really good to have a lot of people on board with this, to share their stories and their experiences, and to sue the airlines so that they can put a stop to all of this type of behavior, this Nazi mask behavior. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I hope so. I'll tell you something fucked up now, though, is that let's say, imagine if they sue the airlines and they win and they get a big payout. Where do you think that money is going to come from?
Taxpayers' money. Yeah, that's fucking, I didn't think about that.
See how rigged it is? Yeah, see how bad it is. So this is where, like, I 100% agree with you. Like, we've got to make the airlines' lives a living hell and all this sort of stuff until they actually stop doing this. But unfortunately, because we're actually still playing the game, we're actually, us doing the right thing. Yeah, all we're doing is we're stealing from our fellow person. It's so fucking wrong.
So messed up. And that's the same thing with the vaccine. The manufacturers aren't held liable. And if you do have any damages, you'd be compensated with taxpayers' money. Yeah. And it's like they're just raping us left, right, and center.
We're paying for something we don't need, and the damage of that which we don't need, we will pay for as well. So like, when people talk about like, oh yeah, the vaccines are going to be given out for free. I'm like, they're not free, you idiot. We're paying for it. So we're all paying for something we don't need. Like, and this is why, like, again, none of this is possible in a world in which the government has a monopoly on money. Like, and that's why I always come back to it, because no matter which road we take, like all the activism we want to do, if we win a big lawsuit against the government, for example, and the government has to pay damages, again, the government's going to pay the damages with the money they took from us anyway. So
yeah, for sure.
It's one fucking loop. You don't get out of it until you break their monopoly on money. So
it's a toxic cycle for sure. Yeah,
it really is. It really is.
And if we do go back to the Constitution, they can't do that. That goes against the Constitution. These taxes and registrations and mortgages, even. It's really interesting. They've really pushed it. That's for sure.
Well, I don't see us I don't see us getting back to a constitution, because I actually think, like I said, we have to break the large scale nation state first, or in the process, it breaks itself against the economic reality of Bitcoin, and then in the aftermath of that, we see the emergence of smaller cities with their own constitutions that are voluntary, opt-in, and we start to actually have choice. Like, honestly, there's probably one other book you should add to your list called The Sovereign Individual, and this is written by a guy called something Davidson and William Rees-Mogg, and these guys are sort of like philosophers, political scientists slash economists, and they wrote this book in the late 90s, and honestly, fucking hell, they predicted everything from YouTube to Facebook. They even predicted fucking Bitcoin in there. Like, I wish I read this book in the 2000s. I'd be multi-billionaire by now. But anyway, they talk about in there, like, the idea of the information age and the capacity to protect private property in the form of wealth through cryptography, which is effectively what Bitcoin does, changing the base incentives of how humanity functions, and us moving into a world where sovereignty moves back towards the local and individual level as opposed to the nation state level. And it's such a fucking powerful book. Like, the shit that they discuss in there is a real map or a model for how the future might look. And they've basically been spot on about everything that they discussed in their book 25 years ago. And like, they even talk about in there, they say that as the nation state starts to fracture and collapse, there's a beautiful paragraph. I might send it to you so you can whack it on your Instagram. But it says that as the nation state starts to fracture and collapse, it'll make moves to potentially restrict international travel, potentially by unleashing viral epidemics and blah, blah, blah. Like, they fucking textbook write what we're living through in the last 18 months in there. It's wild. Crazy. So
I'm gonna have to read that book.
It's one of my favorite books. It's one of my favorites. Like if I have to give people 3 books to read, and like, if you could never read anything else, it would be Sovereign Individual, it'll be For a New Liberty by Murray Rothbard, and it'll be Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. So like, if anyone has not read those, like, they're the top 3. And sort of throw like 1984 in there after that and a couple others, but those top 3 gives you basically the basis upon which you can make all your decisions and live an intelligent life with integrity and responsibility, and sort of have an idea of what the fuck's actually going on in the world.
Oh, that's cool. I think another factor as to why it'll be hard to go back to the constitution and to kind of like clean up the government is because like half the population are with them. And so they'll be against that too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there'll be this 100%. Like war between the people. So I suppose the best way to go about it is how you were saying, where we just sort of like separate ourselves from their society and create our own. To me, that's what I can see working best when I think about it, and I see how people are so subservient to the government and listen to their every word, and they're happy with that. That's what they want. I don't see them changing unless they go through some awakening. I don't know.
Prosperity has always emerged when people have broken off from the old and gone and built the new. I mean, the reason America overtook fucking Europe, which has been around for millennia, is because Europe was mired in fucking bureaucracy and monarchy. A bunch of people went out and they started a new promised land with a new constitution, a new set of rules, and America fucking took over. Now America's become decayed, and it's become the fucking institution that it originally tried to topple. So, and that's all because it tried to turn itself into an empire, so as opposed to limiting the government to purely what the Constitution said, which, as we discussed earlier. But I think, this Bitcoin enables us to separate, economically speaking, and in doing so, what we do is the old gets left behind and it bankrupts itself. Like, that's the whole beauty here, is that the government, in the absence of you and I who are the people working to feed the government, and the government then takes what they took from us and they give to the like. So there's a great saying, which is democracy is taking $1 from a productive person and giving 20 cents to 5 non-productive people. And what you do there is you lose 1 vote, but you gain 5. And that's the government's business model. Is you take from a couple of productive people and you give to a bunch of non-productive people. You turn the non-productive people into agents of the state, and then you get the majority vote, and then you win. Like, and then you keep yourself in power. So by us moving our economic power out, by us moving our economic weight out of the system, the government can't tax us. Then the government then can't tax these idiots because these idiots don't actually produce anything, and the whole thing falls apart. And then what happens is, we have functional, stable, communities, cities, societies that, people can come and join if they work. Ain't no fucking welfare here. There's no handouts. There's no redistribution of wealth. Is you can come and join, but you need to produce something. And that is how we build prosperity.
Do you think that Bitcoin is the factor that will end this continual repeat in history of
100%, 100%,
being raped by a government?
Yeah, 100%, because we always go back down that path because the money can be corrupted. So long as you can corrupt the money, you will always end up back at this cycle. But if you take the money out of everybody's hands and you place it up here where none of us can corrupt it, not you, not me, not any institution, and it's a set of rules that we don't have an option. Like, if we can go and not play by the rules, but then we have to go and create our own version of money. But you can't beat perfect. Like, Bitcoin is perfect money. So as a result, like, it breaks the cycle. Like, I honestly think, like, when you think about societies, and there's this idea of like level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4 societies. So level 1 is sort of hunter-gatherers. Level 2 is where we are now, which is sort of we've basically managed to learn how to technologically do things in the world that hunter-gatherer societies can't do. Now, level 3 is sort of becoming a interplanetary species, so being able to colonize everything else. Now, what they talk about is the idea of going from a level 2 to a level 3 society. We have to pass the great filter. And this ties into Fermi's paradox, which is why haven't we seen aliens, is the most likely cause of it is most societies that get as advanced as ours, they don't actually pass the great filter. They either blow themselves up, they drop a nuke, an asteroid hits them, they die of starvation through, communist mandates or Nazis and all this sort of stuff. I actually think Bitcoin gets us through the great filter, is that it gives human beings an opportunity to get through that without fucking blowing ourselves up and without turning into a draconian dystopian nightmare, which is really what the world's becoming at the moment. Like, we are moving into a fucking dystopian nightmare.
It avoids like self-destruction pretty much. Exactly. Wow. What a time to be alive, huh?
Honestly,
this is gonna make history.
Like, it really is. Like, as much as I'm saddened and I feel despair for like how crazy the world's become. At the same time, like I Bitcoin's the most hopeful thing for me, because I know that there are good people around, and those of us who choose to opt out, we can rebuild. And in us rebuilding, we actually save fucking everyone else's ass. And that is so fucking hopeful. Like, when I always wonder, like, because in the Bitcoin circle, like, a lot of people have come to this realization. They're like, fuck, fix the money, fix the world. And that's sort of one of the Bitcoin memes. And when I think about people who are not in Bitcoin, and I think like how disparaging it must feel to look at this, government edifice and this central banking edifice that no matter what rock you throw at it, nothing you do changes. Like, and that perfect example, like, I saw the light bulb moment in your eye when you were like, fuck, if people come together and sue the airlines are just going to get bailed out by the government. So we've won a war, but we've paid for it ourselves. It's like, fuck, you can't win, right? So it's like, like, in the absence of Bitcoin, fuck me, I'd be very pessimistic on the future of humanity, but in the existence of it, I'm super optimistic.
Yeah. Wow. It's a huge blessing. And
It really is. It really is. So, Dee, do you have any final closing thoughts that you wanted to sort of run through before we wrap this baby up? This has been a monster of a show.
I think we pretty much covered everything. Hey, like nothing comes to mind that I want to include or add.
All right. Well, where can you quickly mention where people can find you? I know you're on Instagram. Where else can people find you and sort of follow your work and support?
So I do run a page on Facebook. It's called Reignite Democracy Australia New South Wales. It's under Monica Schmidt, who runs like the main page. Yeah, and I just post like podcasts on there, interviews and information on there. I'm really solution based. I already know that the government's trying to rape us up in the ass. Like, I already know vaccines are bad. I already know that the testing is fraudulent. I know all of this. I don't need to look into that anymore. I'm solution based. So, yeah, everything that I post is to help people overcome what's happening. And maybe I'll be posting more about Bitcoin then.
Definitely. I can help you with some resources on that. So that's Facebook. Where can people follow you on Instagram if you want to make that public? Do you want to make that public or?
Yeah, I have an account, Be Free with D. So Be Free with D. D has 2 E's on the end.
Okay, cool.
I also have a Telegram group where I post all the information, all the notices, any legal information that will help you and serve you, and even videos and stuff that help us understand the government, the structure, and yeah, the legalese behind it all, the birth certificate, a lot of solutions of claiming your live life or submitting a UCC form. Yeah, just a lot of stuff that we can use as our ammunition against what's happening. So I have a group in there that I just post stuff. No one talks. It's just me posting, and people just go through it all.
And the name of the group, or will you just send me the link and I can put it in the show notes?
Yeah, I'll send you the link. The link is also on my bio on Instagram, but I'll send you the link as well. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Facebook group, Instagram page, Telegram page, everyone listening to this, jump on those. I jumped in the Telegram group and I downloaded all the docs.
Nice.
For use. I mean, I'm not in Oz at the moment, but like, you know, if and when I do come back there, if this stupidity is still fucking going, I'll like, I don't know. I've come to the point where like, I just literally don't care. So I'm willing to spend my time to make someone's life difficult who's trying to make my life difficult. So if I have to walk around with a whole fucking folder of paperwork, I will. I'll be like, here's a notice, sign here, motherfucker. So
nice.
Yeah.
That's what we need. We need people to keep fighting against the system and make it a pain for everyone.
That's it. It's only then that shit actually changes.
To give up,
yeah.
So
that's it. That's it. Yeah. They want us to be fucking subservient. So, you know, and if we go and decide to be subservient, then nothing's ever gonna fucking change. So
yeah.
All right. Yeah. Dee, love your work. Thank you so much for coming on and putting the time aside on a Saturday morning. Absolutely. And yeah, I will aim to get this live hopefully in the next week or so, so that people can get access to this info.
Sounds good. Thanks, Alex. You've actually taught me a lot during this conversation, so I really appreciate that. You're a very knowledgeable man. And yeah, good on you for like reading all those books and making your critical evaluation to everything and sharing that. It's amazing. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Dee. It really means a lot. It really means a lot. I think, you know, people like us coming together, I think is, you know, again, what gives me hope for the world is that that it's not just all blind, subservient, compliant sheep everywhere. There's pockets of brilliance and pockets of hope. So yeah, I am honored to be a part of that alongside you. So thank you.
Likewise. Thanks, Alex. See ya.
Thanks.